Hi, I'm Revanth. This is part 2 of a WebAPI video series. In this session, we will discuss WebAPI architecture and pipeline. So, what is an architecture and pipeline? Architecture means in simple, we can say it may be a design or a structure. It defines the overall look of a design building block of an application. It is nothing but an API. Pipeline means set of data processing elements connected in series where the output of one element is interlinked and it will be a input of next one. We will discuss more details about the architecture and pipeline in a moment. So what are you waiting for? Let's get started. WebAPI architecture. When the client sends request to the web server will process the request and returns the response to the client. This is a basic architecture of WebAPI, but it undergoes many different stages like message handler. Message handler is a class that receives an HTTP request, processes it, or it has the ability to decline the incoming request and returns the response back to the client. And we will discuss more details about the message handler in later video section. Next is authentication filter. When we look at here, there is student controller, teacher, and the library and transport and administration. If we want to access any of the action method in the student's controller, which we have defined, it's an authenticated user only can access it. So this authentication filter will help us whether the user is authenticated or not to access the action method which is defined inside this student controller. If the user is not authenticated, if there is no valid authentication token, this authentication filter will reject the incoming request and gives the response back to the client as 401 unauthorized exception. Don't worry, you will be clearly understand when we do programming. Next is action filter. Action filter is usually used for logging or for timestamp. In action filter, we have different override methods like on action executing, on action executed, on result executing, on result executed. So these methods will help before and after execution of action methods when we call the controller. We will discuss more details about these methods when we do programming. Next is exception filter. Exception means unhandled errors raised in code will lead to exception. These exceptions will be handled over using exception filter. It can be used in the controller level or globally in web API configuration. We will discuss more details about this exception filter in the programming. So when the exception occurred in the web API, it will be handled over to the exception filter. This exception filter will process the exception and gives the response back to the client. And there is one more filter, that is custom filter. We will discuss more details about the custom filter, how to create the custom filter while we do programming. Next is API pipeline flow. When the user requests the web API using HTTP request, it will check whether the request is a get or post or put or delete type of request. If finding matching API URL found, then it will check whether the API is protected or not. If the URL didn't find, it will return the response as a 404 not found error message to the client as the response. If the API is protected, it will check whether the user is authenticated or not. If the API is not protected, then it will directly call the API method without authenticating the user. If it is an authenticated, it will check the authentication credentials. If it is valid, then only it will call the API method. If it is not authenticated, if the user provided invalid token, it will return the response has 401 unauthorized error message to the client. If something goes wrong in the WebAPI action method, like unable to connect to the database or some exception occurred in the method, it will return the response has 500 internal server error message to the client. If it is success, it will return the response has 200, that means success. This is a complete flow of a WebAPI pipeline. This current slide is already simplified and discussed in the previous slides. This diagram referenced from ASP.NET website. If you have any questions regarding this session, please feel free to comment. Thank you.